Good afternoon, everyone. Wanted to welcome everyone to this roundtable, the first roundtable of Performance Affair. I'm one of the two co-founders. My name is Liv Weisberg, and well, Will Care. This is just come in a second. So we launched this project this year, and we're very happy to see so many of you here today to come to the first roundtable. We had the idea of launching Performance Fair because we think that performing artists and the gallerists, collectors, and the whole ecosystem, museums, it's very trendy at the moment to make performance everywhere, but the economy of performance is often overlooked, and we think that it's important to have this discussion. And when I see so many people in this room, I'm delighted to see that it's shared with so many. So we are very happy to have Rose Lejeune, who accepted to come today to prepare the talk and moderate the talk. And Rose is a curator and a writer as well, and is looking in depth in those questions of collective performance art. And we're also very delighted to have a series of, we invited specifically some people to launch the discussion. They will introduce themselves in a second. But the idea is that everybody here, absolutely everybody, is included in the discussion. It's not just, that's why we made it like a proper roundtable. We are live on YouTube.
2 channels.
2 channels. And we want this to be the first of a series of talks, series of performance affair all across Europe and the globe. We hope to have an exhibition announced soon in another country. We're working on it, so yeah. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
So,
So the first thing, of course, to say is thank you so much to Liv and Will for the invitation to be here, but also, of course, for all of their hard work to put this on, which I suspect is probably looks a lot simpler than it actually was. But I think that it's really exciting to be here, and I was really happy to be able to accept the invitation from them. Because as Liv says, I think that this is a really kind of particular moment, both...
Make everything white and repeat round table in
Closer.
yellow.
Can you...
Repeat round table again under apparatus in yellow.
Just because I think in that sense this is a really kind of particular moment, both in terms of the art market in a really general sense and much more specifically thinking about how certain types of practices that don't fit into the art market in a very kind of object-based way are really kind of at risk and having kind of very specific types of difficulties in terms of how they're produced, how they're disseminated, how they're supported in both within the market and within the kind of public art infrastructure, and that those things are changing. I mean, coming from the UK context in particular, where we've seen really radical changes in the way that government funds art production in general, and we've seen really a very kind of swift shift to something where the art market is very, very strong and very visible. And there's really been a lot of conversation that I think is very important about how those kind of practices that maybe traditionally have not been engaged in the art market might be incorporated into that, but also vice versa, that there are lots of problems with the art market in a kind of general sense. And so there's a moment now to think not just about how the economy of performance might be changing, but also how to really kind of be agents in making sure that that's a kind of long-term and sustainable and kind of exciting moment for a practice, rather than just simply saying, how do we create conditions within which performance can be part of this art market, brackets, which is really problematic. So, as Liv said, we've brought a whole series of kind of fabulous people here today who maybe have some very particular, whether that's supporting artists through production or through commercial, or coming from a legal position, or within a private foundation. And I think what we're going to do is start off just with a few kind of general introductions, and then I've got maybe a couple of questions about how you guys are all working and you see it. But as Liv said, I really hope that very quickly we can start a conversation between everybody. I know that there are lots of people in the audience who are both curators, gallerists, but also actually very importantly artists who might be able to kind of offer their experiences and tell us what they think is important and how they would like to be able to be supporting it, as well as how we might think together about so I'm going to start off by handing the microphone to my right, to Ellen, and ask her to introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Ellen de Bruyne, and I have a gallery in Amsterdam and a project. I started the gallery 20 years ago because I saw around me a lot of young artists at that time, end of the 90s, who were working with performance, and at that time there was not really a gallery that was supporting them. And I saw a lot of performances happening in alternative spaces, and that's nice, of course, but I was thinking, like, how can I help the artist to get one step higher or further, or how you want to call it, to end up in a collection, or to have it, let's say, captured or saved for the future. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to start my gallery. I'm not specific a performance gallery, because I do not believe in special only parts of art. I want to see it in a more broader sense, but it was one of the reasons to start the gallery, absolutely. So I'm representing artists from the start as Dora Garcia, as a performance artist, Jeremiah Day, who is also here, and Volker Pisano, for instance, and Sana Ivanova, and maybe a little bit less known, but a very interesting artist, Maria Pask, and yeah, so that's, I think the was to support them. Maybe you can introduce it.
Hello everyone, my name is Antonia Blocker. I'm the curator of public programmes at the Zapladovich Collection, which is a privately funded collection and gallery space in North London. I was previously the public programmes curator at the Whitechapel Gallery, and I've also worked in public programming at the ICA, the Institute of Contemporary Art, and at 7. These organisations have curators of performance. I think there is one curator of performance in London, and I'm not sure that she's going anywhere. So in order to kind of work in performance and events-based practices, or working with artists that aren't necessarily supported so well through exhibitions, I work in public programming. So it's very interesting to be here engaging in this conversation about legitimising and sort of formalising performance and how we might move forward in doing that.
Hi everybody, excuse me for my English, because I'm a French and Algerian artist, half French, half Algerian, so my English is not as good as yours, of course. So I'll try to be efficient and to be comprehensible. I'm now 47, and I perform since I'm 27. I began at school in France to have a gesture activity, and 20 years ago it was a real big problem in French schools to perform. I was told that it was surely better for me to be a comedian or an actor, but the institutions said me really often that performance was dead, that it was a medium from the 70s, and that they didn't really understand why a young artist I was beginning to perform in the 80s, the 90s. So it's been a long time since I decided to just act and to just propose gesture. So I had a long way in this kind of medium in France, and abroad, but it has been really difficult to stay performing, to stay a performer. And now, of course, since 10 years, 5 years, I'm really glad to see that we had a big evolution on this medium. And I'm really glad to be here, of course, to share with you all these questions of economy. And I work since quite 2 years with Michel Rhin, which is gallerist in Paris, involved also with Dora Garcia. He also works with Dora Garcia, and he's not here, but I think it's very important to be also accompanied by gallerists and professionals, and it's not really a simple way to simple thing to acquérir. Nobody speaks French here. It's quiet, yeah. So I will stop now. Thank you. Who is my neighbor?
Okay, hi everyone, I'm John Sharples. I'm an intellectual property lawyer at Simmons & Simmons in the City of London. I come at this from two perspectives. One is as a lawyer, and most time when people go to a law office, it's a bit like going to the dentist, and no one really wants to be there. But I think in the performance art context, lawyers do have some potential to provide something that supports and underpins creativity, because until we can describe this stuff, fix it, and be clear about what it is that we might own as a cultural asset, then we can't really take this on. So I think there's a legal perspective that's important. And my firm also has a reasonably eminent collection of contemporary art in the UK, and I also look after that. Thanks.
Hi, my English is not that good as yours too. So my name is Nathalie Guillot, I'm French, I'm based in Brussels for 15 years now. And I was a journalist and a publisher in Paris during 20 years. And then I started to be involved in art contemporary in 2008, where I started a collection, formal collection of objects. And then I thought it was interesting to curate exhibitions, so I worked with different curators, and I was curious and I liked the experience, so I started to produce a platform of performance, and we work with Carole, and we organize a big platform at the Wheels during 4 days. It was very intense and very much about alive and sharing and just being there, being the present, totally intense and I don't know, I think it's important to have this balance between this formal and object and also this relation, this collaboration with artists on a specific space, specific format, specific duration. As here, I have produced the performance of Sarah Trouche. And now I have this space called Tally Lab, which is a foundation where I organize exhibition, but not really exhibition, and I think there's too much exhibitions, so I'm trying to find another path, and it takes me again to performance, so we will organize a new platform in Tally Lab in November with Sarah. So I work with plenty, Rachel Monosov, Alex Cecchetti. I even perform myself with a collective female artist, Belgian female artist called After Lucy Experiment. And I invited also Rosalie Goldberg to speak about performance in the 1970s in New York, which is, fabulous. So voila. Thank you, I'm very glad to be here, and to hear you guys also.
Thanks. And now, Rose, you can continue the conversation.
slightly kind of performative microphone element of this as well. So I guess actually the first question that I wanted to ask was in some respects quite a basic one, which I think maybe is partly to Ellen and Antonia. Antonia, you kind of alluded to the fact that, say, for example, in London there are very few performance curators. And I guess also you mentioned the idea, Ellen, that over the last 20 years there's been a real kind of, on the other hand, there's been a real kind of movement towards a kind of institutionalization of performance. So I wondered if you could both just slightly kind of dig into some questions, something around the idea of what you think is different about producing performance, both in a kind of museum or a public art gallery context to working with artists in different ways, and how you think that those institutions have started to take that on, and what you see as being the kind of changes in the landscape within that time period that you're mentioning.
I can also, I can actually only approach that from my own experience in a gallery. I'm working now with artists like Dora Garcia, who is doing performances for 20 years. So if I have to think about a development or a change, then 20 years ago, everybody, or a lot of people, approached the gallery and were asking, maybe not directly to me, but to fellow artists, is there anything to buy? And so that's the first 10 years. Everybody thought that, yeah, it was nice that people were that I was doing and producing performances, showing performances, but the audience was not yet there to approach it or to take this bridge. They were only spectators, which is already wonderful. That's also, it's one part, and maybe it's the most important part, that you can see a performance. But of course, you need to create a situation, I think, that there is, and that there are some people who can save it, who can save the performance. And that, in the last years, I really can see it and feel it, and also by really selling a Dora Garcia performance to a museum. Yes, it happens. But you have to work sometimes 10 years towards that. It's really like step by step by step. I don't know, maybe you can tell about another perspective.
Yeah, I think the question of duration is key, because I think that performance, and I speak about London because that's the area that I'm aware of, institutions are limited in the way that they can support performance by very real parameters, mostly space and time. So if you don't have a physical space within your gallery, museum, in which to stage a performance, then that's a very clear limitation and hurdle to overcome. And then also there are the structures of opening hours, so most galleries are open from 10 till 6, and performances tend to not last, how many hours is that? 8 hours. And so you have to kind of find ways to work within these spaces and within these timeframes in order to allow performance to happen. So in London, most major spaces don't have space for performance. They might have auditoriums, which are sort of coded in particular ways already. The Tate has tanks, which is wonderful. There are certain institutions that are now separate from space, so Block Universe, Louise is here, is doing a wonderful job at championing performance in London. But the Serpentine doesn't have a dedicated space. They have the pavilion, which is why their public programme and their performance programme that gets embedded within that is then tethered to that architecture. The Whitechapel doesn't really have space for performance. So without actually providing a physical structure, then there's no way to do this. So I think that there has kind of been moves towards supporting performance in a more effective way in the past few years, and why that is, I suppose it's sort of an appetite. If you have, as you say, if you have an audience for something, then those spaces start to open up. But it's actually changing these structures of organisations is very difficult and takes a really long time.
So then the other kind of space that I think I would like to just bring into the mix straight away is the space of the fair, which obviously this has been a kind of very specific attempt to provide a platform for performance art within that kind of commercial context. But obviously it strikes me that most frequently when one sees performance art at a fair, it's kind of delivered as a sort of afterthought or as a kind of part of a kind of social experience rather than being a kind of key commercial element of the key commercial element of the kind of system itself. So I guess the question then, again, to Ellen and actually to any of the other gallerists that are here today that have been showing within Performance Affair, and to any of the artists as well, is has the fact of this being a kind of dedicated performance fair in that sense, how has that been a very kind of different experience to maybe when you've been showing work, performance work in a fair in a more kind of general sense? So in fact I might ask that question to Jeremiah, whose performance I saw last at Arco, and just trying to kind of get to grips with what the difference maybe is around something that kind of treats performance as a medium in its own right, and something that allows performance within its structures, but maybe without those kind of dedicated platforms.
Okay. I think in general, and that's maybe not such a nice thing to start with, but I think in general, an art fair is not the best place to look at art. Sorry about that, and it's also not for an artist and also for a gallerist, it's not the nicest place to be, because it was always compromising, But saying that, okay, that's maybe another discussion, because it is really something in general. But we have this structure of, let's say, communication through art fairs. Okay. Then I think it's good when there is a general art fair and also performance program intertwined. But that's on other art fairs, it was very hidden. So I think that it's good to have a performance art fair, to have a kind of kind of positive booth for the medium. But if you ask me if it's good, if there is in the end a fair for painting and a fair for photography and a fair for performance, then I say no, that's not the thing we want, of course. It's one thing. I see art as one thing with different medias, and also an artist is not it's not only a painter, or it's not only a performance artist. It's a whole artist. It's a whole person. So that's far more interesting to really try in the end to have all kinds of different media. That's what I can say about a performance affair. But of course, it's nice to have this positive booth to get it, well known, more normal. What can we say? Bring it in the world. Yeah.
I agree with you. I think it's more about also focus and attention that you give to the performer, to the performance, and the context, the format is quite weird somehow. I'm sorry, I'm very direct, but it's like, okay, how can I focus to all these proposals at the same time? And you need to be like in a progression, not giving things like, okay, this is it now, and then the next one is here, and then, like, I think the idea of as a producer of performance, I think what I like is to be in a discovery. I mean, not to be like searching vinyls or museum. For example, I remember the performance of one performance of Tino Segal at the Guggenheim. The Kiss, or the thing that they did with different generation of people. And I think as a collector, I'm not collecting performance, but I'm more like in being surprised. And here I was surprised, of course, by the format. But I'm not sure about the artist, because I'm close to the artist, and I'm not, that they want to experiment with this new format. But, I'm kind of uncomfortable, also, about this format. Because why? We have already so many fairs. We have like 280 fairs a year. And I think there's something to dig on this idea of a community of performer, but I'm not sure about the fair things. And I have a very pragmatic question. What do you think, curator, about, what do you think about that? Are you going to, did you acquire a performance here? Did you buy, did you have some clients or curators, museum? That's the idea, it's a fair, no? I don't know.
This is not a fair. This is like, people were saying that the experience was very meta. It was like a meta representation of itself, where entering the space was active, and observers became performers, and then they became voyeurs of other observers who were performers. So we were much more interested in activating space and creating some sense of consciousness and interaction, more than following some stale format. So we invented the idea of an affair. And an affair is tangible, it's not tangible, it's a memory, it's forgotten, it's a happening. It exists in the moment. You're talking about time-space, which is really the intersection of everything. And I think we all know that performance has a particular opportunity to engage with the field, with space, but also with people that are coming into the space. So as artists living in this time and interpreting what we're interpreting, we can use a space that becomes collective, because there were so many things happening at the same time. And in a way, we embody what is possible in an impromptu community that's based on respect. And it's based on not really knowing what's happening, being open, like you're talking communication. So I think it's important to think in this context that we're not a fair. A performance affair can be anywhere, at any time. We're fluid, we're abstract, but we're also tangible, just like performance itself.
I suggest we give the micro to an artist who lives this format, this new format. What do you think? Like, for example, Sarah Trouche. Sarah, do you want to say something? as you performed during 4 hours yesterday.
I didn't introduce myself. My name is Will Kerr, and I'm an artist. Sarah Touche, would you like to come over here? There's a...
Hi, everyone. Nathalie for the you can tell about your experience,
Yes,
the creation, the format as you are performing.
I've been a performer since my 18. So my first action was in Paris. I was barely 18 years old. And because of this action, I entered in my school, which was the School of Fine Art of Paris. At that time, performance wasn't taught at all in art school. So, I mean, everybody was just like, seriously, why are you doing art school because you're a performer? But like, what I'm interested in performance, it's actually that you can touch everything. You can touch sculpture, photography, video, audience, and you have to be engaged with your environment, and you have to be engaged with people you work with. And it's not like a format. It could be architecture, literature, dance, and everything is just connected together, and it allows you to think and open boundaries. And it's why I choose this format. But the problem itself of performance, it's always like, can you make a living out of it? It's always this question, like, oh, okay, you're an artist, it's already like, woman artist, it's even worse. But then when you say, I'm a performer, it's even like, wow. Yes, it's possible in the sense that I do travel a lot in different foundations and places, and I work with communities, and because of this work, I enter in collection, great places like Tali, and I think it's interesting because it's not about the format itself, but it's about the engagement that you have in your life. And at the end, when someone chooses to work with me, they choose because of the commitment I could have for 10 years, 15 years and everything, and what I would try to defend. So I mean, it could be social, like problem or communities in Kazakhstan, or next week I'm in Benin, for example, with the French embassy. So I mean, it's all these things where you try to respond with the space and with people, and it's what I like about it.
I mean, I have to say though, I was quite surprised to hear you say that this is not a fair. I mean, it strikes me that you've set, I mean, the format of it, and even the choice of this building, which at other moments is used as a fair, and this idea of these booths and this kind of time frame and this kind of way of, in that sense, creating a space where the economics of the situation are also kind of very visible, to me quite clearly references the idea that this is a fair. And the extra AF in the word, you know, potentially creates some more kind of, a bigger kind of conversation about the experience and the presentation and performance. But nevertheless, it seems very clearly to mirror and to describe itself within a conversation of other fairs. And actually for me that was really important as a way of understanding what it might be trying to activate and the way that it might be trying to activate it. Because I think in that sense that's a very different kind of approach to describing performance than a festival approach or a kind of public presentation in a museum kind of approach. So that, in a funny way, that was one of the bits of it that I thought, oh, this is really exciting. And also has been my experience of being here in the last couple of days is that one of the things that's been really interesting is to go around and to, every single time you look at a performance, to be able to have the conversation with the gallerist, what is for sale? How does this work? How have you negotiated with the artist to think through what the ramifications of this exchange might be and this kind of movement of ownership and all of those questions that brings with it. So whilst that poetic version of it is very lovely, it also sort of surprises me that you resist that. And I wonder if you could say a bit more about why you resist that.
Maybe as I'm the other co-founder, I can give my version. I mean, I'm not an artist, I'm a lawyer initially, copyright lawyer, and I changed career 2 years ago to work in fairs. So I'm quite, I visited fairs for many years as a visitor, and then I ran fairs, and I noticed that fairs were, I agree with Ellen, I created my first fair propositions 7 years ago to make it an anti-fair, because fairs are a necessary evil, and everybody agrees, a terrible place. It's like, no one likes it, but they're still growing. Natalie said it now, 300 fairs or even more, and I always put a propositions diagram where we started with 3 fairs in 69, and now there's every week or every 2 days a new fair. But what we wanted to do here is by observing and having conversations with artists, with their gallerists, with collectors and museums, that performances everywhere, as you said, festivals, at every fair there's always performance as an entertainment. Some fairs are selling performance. I mean, I know that gallerists give me some good experience, but it's always a side note, and what we wanted to do was also to create a platform that was not just a fair, that was something that was really thinking this economy, and also now is taking this format. But this building is actually a former furniture shop from the 30s. Then it was where the Dexia had its collection, and it became a cultural center. Well, it belongs to the city of Brussels, and there's all sorts of events, some good, some bad. I mean, you know this building because there's been actually proposition in 2014 was here. There's been Independent, there's been Collectible, the fair created, and now there's this, but there's also all year long, all sorts of events. And this, for me, is a hybrid platform, and we insist on platform. We ask the artists and the galleries to write one page on how they want to sell their performance. The only reason we asked this was to change mentality and move things. Our only motive was to just change the status quo and force people to think about it. Everyone, artists usually are the one who think the most about it, because that's, I mean, their practice. That's also, as Sarah said, you need to make a living, and as a performing artist, it's really difficult. The galleries are not, I mean, of course, Hélène is an example, but I've spoken to so many galleries who said, oh, that's a good idea. I never thought about selling performance. And at least just writing this one page was triggering the beginning of thinking about it. And collectors, I spoke to some collectors who said, I would buy a performance if I was offered a performance, but no galleries ever thought of offering a performance. They just sell the props, the videos, the documentation, but not the actual performance. Because it is also a contractual issue, there's a lot of preservation, much more difficult issues. So that's why we created this platform, to actually discuss those issues. And we want to reborn in all sorts of formats. This is, indeed, we're playing, come on, a fair, of course we're playing, it's a pun. It's a bad pun, or a good pun. But it was kind of a joke, not a joke, but yeah, a performance, a meta performance. So we wanted to trigger reactions. That was really, the aim was to trigger interest in the economy of performance, because not a lot of people care about it. So, and we wanted to gather people interested and change things slowly. Sorry for the long talk, but
So I guess what I want to do then is bring John back into the conversation a little bit, as somebody who actually has, I think in fact with Alex and Lana, who are kind of sitting next to him, spent quite a lot of time. And there's also a couple of other kind of gallerists who are in the room who I'm very aware are also actually exactly the kind of people who have been thinking about some of these things. So there are two questions really, and one is two gallerists who are kind of here, both Alex and Lana, and Alice, who's just behind, and Dave from 17. There's a couple of other people who. So I guess the question would be, well, how does it being an explicit platform for the sale of performance art? How has that changed, and what has that triggered for you? And has that been a kind of useful way of thinking through some of those questions? And then the second one is something that's a bit more practical, which is a bit more about kind of trying to describe what some of the criteria that you're having to think through are, what some of those kind of practical things are. John wrote a very nice kind of piece earlier on, just on Instagram, where he kind of wrote down sort of things about the relationship in that sense between collecting and patronage, but also I guess maybe some of those more practical questions that you have to think about in terms of ownership, in terms of copyright and all of those kind of things. So it's quite a big, that's two quite big things actually, but maybe I can see Alice has got the microphone, so I might ask her to say a few words.
Yeah, actually, we're presenting Dimensionals, and an artist that we also presented at Perform at Artissima 2 years ago. And it's been a very different experience. And I think so with Dimensionals, an artist in the visual art world, he tends to perform himself. He also has a theatre company called Force Entertainment, where he works he's the director and founder. It was founded in the 80s. So he's used to working with other performers, but in his own performance work under the name of Dimensionals, it's normally him. And when we presented at Perform in Artissima, it was one of his pieces. He collects language, he collects snippets of things that he hears in the newspaper, or things he hears in conversations on the train or on a plane. He collects this together, a kind of archive of language and words, and often creates these sort of note cards, which then, when he's in a space on his own, he performs out, he speaks out these phrases, he repeats, he changes the intonation, he switches between different ideas and different snippets. And he did this at Artissima, but this was at a point where, with these pieces, he wouldn't consider selling that work for someone else to perform for someone else to take his place. He also makes neon works and works on paper that use the same kind of collection of words and language, which obviously are for sale. But he'd been in conversation with Catherine Wood at the Tate after he launched the Tate Exchange there in the new Tate Modern building. And where there was a discussion at that point about how he could sell these pieces, which would be actual performance. He was very clear he wouldn't have someone who would stand in for him for a piece that was already devised. So when we were discussing with Liv and Will and the team about this, an interesting thing came up where the dates of this, he was going to be away. He was absolutely, there was no way he could be here. Which brought up the exact question that we needed, which was what happens, can the work exist when he's not here? So in order to present here, he went into the rehearsal studio with another performer, someone who's worked with before, and he developed a new piece, which uses the same mechanisms of speaking out a phrase, but taking it and bringing it right back to very simple 5 words. And something that he could see this performer, Bruno, who was performing it here, and also other performers in the future. And then, because we were asked to then present kind of how it would be sold, which is something that Tim has been kind of discussing for a long time. He was part of the Tate Modern. They did a discussion, a panel, a series of discussions on collecting live art about maybe 5 years ago even. So he's been thinking about this for a long time, and the way that we developed this piece was to have a series of, so we'd have documentation of him giving instructions to another performer, documentation of him in the rehearsal room with Bruno, giving him instructions, documentation of the piece here, and also the score, which is a set of 5 note cards which he's written the phrases on. So the performance would then could be acquired, and it's unique plus 1 AP, so it would be acquired with all these elements, so that someone could then an institution could then re-perform it, or the collective, this private collective, could have all the material needed to have another performer without him being there to direct it. And then he'd have 1 AP, which would basically give him the right to perform it with his own at some point himself. And one thing actually with the copyright thing that I was talking to Rose about was we were sent the contract from a performance affair from Liv, who is a copyright lawyer, said that she kept it intentionally simple, but Tim immediately said, there's no way I'm signing this. He's been given a lot of contracts over the years, and he said, the way that the contract was written was that, and I don't think it's not the intention of the organisation, but they could potentially do whatever they want with the documentation. They could sell it, they could do whatever. And he was like, this is not what. Also with live streaming, he's very careful that live streaming never goes out of the entire piece, because if that happens, then where's the value for the person requiring the performance, which basically is part of that, is the documentation to be able to perform it. So.
Can I just ask, Alice, what does this edition of one cost? If I want to buy this today, how much am I paying?
It would be, well, the discussion would, at the moment, it'd be about 25,000, but it's around that region. It's something that £25,000 would be kind of at least the discussion I had with Tim. He's still very much the whole question of how to price, to put a value on performance is also it's a huge question. So I think this is what for this piece, based on all of the elements of building that piece up, and then, and obviously then the costs of re-performing it in the future would then.
And because he retains the artist's proof, if he wants to lend that to a museum or an institution, he can still do that. So that isn't the sole right of the buyer.
So he wouldn't lend the idea. So the scorecard that you see in the space, this only exists once. So the scorecard, the documentation, all of the elements in order for somebody else to perform it is only exists once. It's unique. And then the AP would be something which is just Tim Etchell's able to present it himself.
So he doesn't need the scorecard because he doesn't need the instructions.
Exactly.
That's right, okay.
Yeah.
So, John, I wonder if you could tell us something a little bit more then about where those questions come from. I mean, you mentioned that you have these kind of dual roles, and one is obviously enough as a lawyer, but the other is also as a collector.
Okay. So very quickly, copyright law generally is not fit for practice in the 21st century. So international copyright law was settled at the Berne Convention in 1886 and hasn't really moved on since. And so we have this old-fashioned nature of copyright that insists on distinct historical categories of works. And so we have this problem that performance art does not fit into any of these neat boxes. And so one of the things that, and I compare it to TV formats. You can't say there's distinct intellectual property in a TV format. So if you want to buy that, if you want to license that outside of the original conditions of creation, you have to basically fudge it a bit and buy a whole package of rights. And it depends very much on the industry norm that industry players will recognise that when you buy this thing, there's something of value there. That's where performance art needs to get to. And I think it could happen very quickly if there is some kind of critical mass achieved by basic standards of describing and documenting this stuff. And just to give you an idea about how quickly purchasers' minds can move on. So when I was a teenager in the 90s, I was downloading illegal music tracks and movies left, right and centre on Napster, never thinking that I was going to end up being an intellectual property lawyer. Now, in a very, very short space of time, because the market was created, the Apple Store, Spotify, because we achieved some international standards quite quickly, there's now no doubt at all that there is value in a single MP3 or a film. No one expects to download that stuff for free. And I think the same thing could happen in this area if we agree on how we describe these things and how we hold them.
So, I mean, I think that's a sort of fascinating kind of idea that what you need to do is to come up with a kind of basic set of principles. I mean, partly because one of the things that I find so interesting and exciting about working with artists in this way is that every single one is completely different. And so that idea that what you would then need to do is to take those things and kind of format them in such a way that they can always fit into a particular, is kind of, I mean, counterintuitive to say the least.
So I'm on the one hand arguing for standardization on how we treat these things, but then of course that leaves room for a huge level of specificity and bespoke negotiation when it comes to the thing itself. And so with my other hat on as a collector, The exciting opportunity here is that this is a possible countercultural moment where you can, instead of this idea of a broken art market where paintings go into storage units in free ports, this is a thing where you should rejoice in being given this list of rules and obligations. So as a collector, you should be proud to say that yes, I'm responsible for the care of this, I'm responsible for upholding the standards. I owe the artist duties. What an exciting thing that is. No artist is going to come to you and say, you wouldn't mind just finishing my sculpture for me, or you wouldn't mind just discussing how I might finish this painting. But in the performance context, the outcome is a negotiated, collaborative outcome, and that should be the most exciting thing in the world, and people should be banging the door down of these galleries who are selling art, selling performance art.
So Ellen and I were speaking briefly earlier on, and one of the things that, and I said to her that one of the things that I had really kind of observed over the last couple of days was precisely this way in which this kind of idea of negotiation is actually in some respects changing the kind of nature of the performance that's presented in the way that Alice described, which was something about a kind of moment where you realise that you have to make a step that you haven't made before because the nature of the idea that you might not be there, or that it can be exchanged, or it can be sold or resold. And Ellen looked at me and she said, no, that's completely not right. So I'm going to ask her if she could tell me why that's not right.
Yeah, I think the starting point is the artist. It is his creation or her creation. It's and the whole organization should adjust to it, to the artist, and not the other way around. I mean, that's crazy in my perspective. So, of course, everybody gets influenced. That saying, I think we should very good listen to the artist. And every person is different. All the performances are different, even from one artist. It's different sometimes. So I'm very much hesitating to just put some formats on it and say, okay, it's fixed, guys. Now, from now on, we can sell and buy performances. It is this discussion you have every time again, like, what is the spine? What is the core of this performance? And from there you can make steps and see how you can make it collectible or something.
I'm definitely not talking about a situation in which you ride roughshod over an artist's will and the work starts to bend to the collector's requirements rather than the artist's requirements. Definitely not. But I'm saying that this kind of mode of selling gives the artist the space to insist on the specificity that they want. You know, these are the rules that I insist on, and if these rules aren't followed, then this isn't a work by me. And that's my vision for this. It's absolutely artist-led. How can it be any other way? But unless an artist knows how to describe what it is that they're dealing with, you know, unless you have that language of licenses and assignments and all that boring legal stuff, you can't deal with it. There's no language to sell it. I mean, of course, you can take the view as an artist that what you do is completely outside the realms of commoditization and sale altogether, and that is a reasonable position. But if you're an artist that wants to sell, wants to create something that other people can buy and share, then you need to find a way to describe that.
Yeah, there's definitely something about the point of sale, and every dealer knows that. It's like there's talking about buying a piece, and then there's closing on the piece. And there's a distance between the two. But I think when we talk about performance, when we talk about acquiring performance, we have to talk about joy, the joy of encountering a performance and falling in love with that performance, because that's what starts the whole cycle of a collector being inspired and acquiring. So along with this, which is so important, have a common language and a common sense, taking a step back of what is an affair versus a fair, it's a culture. It's a culture of learning how to interact in such an arena and learning how to exchange about it. and bringing, like we said, all the people together in one kind of continuous experience to share ideas in an active context. So that's where the idea of the fair comes in, is more going beyond the economies of performance and really creating a culture that can create that, hopefully in some sort of self-sustainable, self-aware way.
Is that on there? Yep. I was just curious because the conversation you're having was really sparking a lot of questions for me as well. I guess that, you know, it was kind of interesting seeing the dialogue between you about the structures that you can create around selling performance versus the artist will and the gallerist will. And I suppose that's something, well, you know, coming from the beginnings of performance, which, you know, for the most part, was created to exist outside the circulation of the market. And obviously, you know, things have changed a lot since then. So, I mean, a few questions that I had, but I don't know who wants to pick them up, but I suppose, you know, I'm curious about how many artists, you know, really want to be able to sell their work in terms of performance. And so does, you know, and also for, in terms of like the legitimization of performance as an art form and its evolution into, you know, collectors' hands and being part of the market in that sense, does, I suppose, does performance need to have a value placed on it? Does it need to have a monetary value in order for it to exist on a level playing field with sculpture or painting or those sorts of things? And I suppose, you know, in terms of what artists want or what the gallery wants and how you adapt those things, my question would also be is, does it also require thinking of what it is that a gallery does? You know, is the gallery only selling the work, you know, or what are the other ways in which a gallery supports an artist? Because we talked obviously about like artists needing to make a living and that's a very practical concern. So it's also a question of rethinking what is the gallery doing for the artist also. So I'd throw those out there.
Yes, I won't answer to your questions, but I think about a lot of things since the beginning of the conversation. And if I go back to the essence of the performance, I think about the artist. How does he earn his life when he performs? And I think about the performers. How do they earn their life? And for me, the situation here is interesting because we focus on these questions. And when you're an artist and engaged in performance, this medium, it's really important to have moments like that, to share ideas, to share experiences, and to focus on this medium. But the difference for me between an exhibition and a fair, in a public institution in France, for example, or abroad, is that when I perform, when I present the viewers, maybe you saw the performance with the viewers, there are quite 20 performers. When I perform in a public institution, they are paid, and I am paid. Not really a lot, but we are paid, and there is a production. Here for the fair, there is no production, nobody is paid. So for me, it's very important also to integrate that the question of the economy for the artist is not at the same time every time he works. For me, the economic question now is not right now. I don't think that I didn't, and my gallerist didn't sell the viewers. It's a big performance. There are 20 to perform, so it's quite an institution which is going to buy it, and it has been. 4 years ago, the French ministry, the CNAP, bought this performance. So it's part of an immaterial collection in France, the ministry immaterial collection. So there is 3 exemplaires, 3 exemplaires. There is no, it's an edition of 4. one is sold, so there is free to sell now. So I don't think I have the experience not to sell the performance now, but maybe the communication on it and the way we performed this time, which was great. We performed 3 times, and I think it was on view. It was really viewed by a lot of people. So I think the economy maybe will go back to us late in time. For me, the performance is really a medium which integrates space and time, but also time and duration. It's a process. It's not. I feel a real paradox between the essence of performance with trying always to escape to something. I think the really essence of performance is to escape. Escape the market, escape the economy, escape the relation between you and an object. I think the artists which are really performing with their heart are trying to escape something. So for me, trying to escape the object while performing puts me to a paradox when I think, okay, I will sell it. So what do I sell exactly? And is performance, how can I say in English this? Est-ce qu'il ne vaudrait pas mieux finalement que la performance n'intègre pas le marché de l'art? I don't know. Maybe performance, the medium is not to be sold. I don't know. It's a real question for me. Do I continue to integrate the market, which is really interesting for a lot of questions, for earning my life, but also because I really trust on this medium, and I think it's really interesting for it to be recognized. But when you begin to sell gesture, for me it's really a question. No, I'm going to go to soon, I hope, to a residency in the Silicon Valley. I hope to go there to work with a lab which is called a Ritual Design Lab. Maybe some of you heard about it. C'est un laboratoire de recherche en design sur le geste et sur le rituel. Et ça m'intéresse beaucoup parce que c'est une équipe de Stanford, de chercheurs de Stanford qui ont développé ce laboratoire il y a 2 ans. Et ils proposent des rituels. They are proposing rituals to people. They sell rituals for the daily life. If you've got a problem with your son which is crying all day, you had a problem with police, you had a problem in your daily life, you can ask the design lab, the ritual design lab to create for you a ritual, which is a performance for me, and you will buy to this lab a physical, bodily way of resolving your problems. So for me, it's the end of, it's the beginning and the end of something. Even the gestures are to sell. So for me, it's really a question. I don't say it's not yes or no, it's really a question. And for me, performance is really a questioning medium. It's in between, always in between. And I hope it will continue to be always in between. And I follow you, you never can stand, I hope we never stand up or trouver une forme qui soit la même pour toutes les performances. I hope it will never be possible. Because each artist is on affects, is very affective, very sensible. And the link between the artist and the galleries, for example, is really sensible. It's really something human. And that's why it's beautiful. It's escaping always. And it's really a human link between, of course, the gallerist and the artist. And how can we keep this quality, this delicate thing, this thin thing, and put it on the market? I don't know, it's a good question. An open question.
Yes, hello. I would like to thank you for this brief speech, because I think you touched really like with the basics of what was the need to. Of course, now performance has become a kind of format, and it has a visibility integrated into a market. And I think to evoke a bit what Liv said before, I think one of the merits certainly of a performance affair, even if you've got this romantic A prefix, It's about exposing this economy, which has become a necessity for a lot of people, but also maybe something that you have not evoked, and that might join the problematic of a curator. It's like about the transmission. And certainly what I understood from your project was also this ambition of transmitting a memory, archiving and transmitting a memory. And for me, it's a very important part of your project. Then I have a question for John and Lee, because you are both lawyers, and you said you were both copyright lawyers. I know very from far that there is a distinction between Latin and Anglo-Saxon law. So the Anglo-Saxon is copyright based on the object, Aristotelian, whereas the Latin law is Platonician, based on the idea. Is there a difference of defense between the two? Where did you study, Liv?
Well, first in the UK and then France.
Okay. So, is there a difference between, like, selling a performance, defining contracts of reproduction in the Anglo-Saxon world, or in France or in Belgium, for instance?
So there's absolutely a difference between America and Europe. Now, in America...
It's Brexit.
Let's not talk about that. I mean, in America, broadly speaking, you're only interested in the economic rights of the author or producer. Like, that's a very crude generalization. And then in the kind of French paradigm, European intellectual property law is interested in the artist's tortured soul as an extension of himself, and the work is them, and it's almost indivisible. So in the UK, we kind of have a blend, but partly because European law, copyright is pretty much harmonised amongst European countries. And actually, even outside Europe, although I've crudely sketched what America might look like, we have international treaties that mean we actually have a much more uniform copyright system than you might think. Now, the difference really is the culture that underpins that, and there are very, very different cultural expectations between Latin countries and Anglo-Saxon countries. And I probably my idea of like fixing this stuff and selling it and trading it is quite an Anglo-Saxon idea. And when I hear you, very eloquently describe the French position, obviously I feel slightly embarrassed by my own kind of mercantile approach to this. But I suspect we have the same shared aims at the end of the day, which is a different idea about how you might get there. I mean, I think it's nothing short of a tragedy that the only organisation that will pay for your thing to happen is the French collection of immaterial artwork. I mean, who's that person? And who's their boss? And when they go back and they say, I bought this artwork, and they're very good, what have you bought? Describe it to me. How does that conversation go? Because that's the point. When you go back and report, and if we were to have this curator of performance art at Tate, and I would love to have that, when that curator goes, oh sorry, okay. Sorry, all right, everywhere was to have this, and to go back to their trustees and say, I've just spent £1 million on a performance work, very good. Tell me how that's an asset, what have we got? Why was that a responsible purchase? Because you need to answer that question, otherwise these things won't happen.
I just wanted to pick up on threads from all these and return to Louise's specific question about is it necessary to commercialise these practices, and I think the way that we've been speaking today is very much based in our present moment and about artists working today and galleries working today and fairs, but in terms of thinking about the longevity and legacy building of these kinds of practices and looking back at art history and what we know of art history and what's been written in and what's been left out. We understand through what's been written about and through what we see in collections. And so if we have an expectation that performance is to be included within the canon of art history moving forward beyond our lifetimes, then unless we figure out how to include performance within collections, or if we find another way to legitimise a canon, then these things will be lost. And I think that there is plenty about performance within kind of written down art history, but yes, I will never know what certain performances were like to experience, and in kind of locking things down, I think there is the potential to lose affect, but without it, then these things just get lost into the effort. And so, do we legitimise these practices through the existing structures, or do we find new structures in which to legitimise them through? But yeah, so it feels necessary.
I'm an artist. My artist name is Sarah and Charles. I'm Charles B. We were also represented, we are number 6, we are represented here by the purchasers of our piece, who are the collectors, and they saw interest in being here and representing us at this fair. And I think where they saw the value is basically the experience that is very unique, that is only for them. And the reason they wanted to also be here is to explain or share the value in owning an experience, and also the value in being able to share an experience. So, I don't know, I see quite some value in performance art, in the sense that as a purchaser, you own something very unique that you can only describe maybe afterwards, and I personally see a lot of value in not even having any physical trace, in a sense to me that kind of maybe even, I don't know, I don't see value in the archive. To me the archive would stay the archive, and the dialogue we had is that they invited us into their home many years ago to sort of residency while they were there, and they really wanted to have something unique, and it was a long dialogue we had, and in a sense the piece was created along with the collectors. So I think performance art needs to find collectors who are not focused on the materialization, the material, the object, something you can hang on the wall or put in an archive, but so a person who is really interested in owning an experience.
In this case, its unique character is linked to the fact that it's irrepetitive. Even if you've got a very precise set of instructions you give, you leave them the choice as to choosing the performers, and it will escape. Also your own control, that's nice, even if the set is very precise. I wanted to break casser une lance tribute, just not to isolate like performance, the nobility of the material escaping the market, vis-a-vis visual artists, like whether it be sculptures. I don't believe in fragmentation. I think there is a lot of porosity, and I think most of the artistic practice and the most interesting parts of artistic practices are time and space based. When you do an exhibition, it's in a fucking space for a fucking length of time, and it's always not as good as in a fair, not as good as in the collector's house. So there is something that escapes, you know? Artists think a lot of time about the exhibitions they make in a space, you know? And when this is gone, this is gone. I'm also speaking for myself because I'm a curator, and I would leave and job, for instance. There is a total blank about the intellectual property of a curator. An exhibition for a curator, that's a performance. When it's over, it's finished. There is a book, a nice catalog. No, nobody can repeat an exhibition. You know, just people have like fragmented memories, and I think that is something that should be seriously investigated. The intellectual, for artists and curators.
So it's a curatorial affair. What? It's a curatorial
I think this should be our next project. But just to answer,
everyone must read Art as Experience from John Dewey. Do you know this book? So I propose to everybody here to read it.
Actually goes into the idea of access.
which is still space. But just to bounce on what Carol said earlier, one of the person we missed today, we wanted to have someone from another sector, so not the visual arts, but we were talking to some artists that are coming from dance and coming from theater. Because one thing that struck us is that we had a conversation with Wagner Schwartz, who we met at Tokyo recently, but who couldn't be here today, and was explaining how, I mean, he's coming from dance, but he wants to be in visual arts, and often there's no porosity in those different sectors. So he doesn't get any money for his visual art. He was exhibited at Palais Tokyo, they did their best, he got production covered and a little fee, but that doesn't make him pay his rent, and I can't speak on his behalf, but I remember we had this conversation and he said, actually I have a parallel career as a dancer, but it's switched to a completely different sector where I get heavily subsidized. And that's also something I think is important to say today, is that the reason why, to answer Carol, do we want to be in the market or not? We are also, as Performance Affair, setting this question because there's no choice. If you want to live, how do you live? You explained, but that was, it's not like we want to market performance, we just ask the question. It's true that it's all, there's porosity between all the practices, but I see the performing artists the weakest because very often they don't have much to sell. And I know that Alice, I mean, don't want to call you, but you told me something very interesting when you arrived here, that you were happy that for once it was focused on your practice, which is movement, gesture, approach, and unfortunately often at all sorts of occasions it's only the works that are left. So when we come to your space and see the beautiful drawings, people will just skip it at a fair and be like, nice drawings, I buy one. But to really highlight the practice, that's what we wanted to do, to give the artist a forum to show that their practice is movements, gestures. So anyway, I don't know if you want to say something.
It's a movement gesture before everything.
Yeah, sure.
So I wasn't going to say much, but then you asked about dance and performance. So my name is Ulasika. I'm a choreographer coming from really a dance and choreography background. I'm now in residency in Wheels. It's the second time that I'm in residency in a museum space, so I'm experimenting and thinking a lot about these questions right now. And one of the biggest questions I have also when I'm listening is that as a dance maker and a choreographer in the sector I work in, especially in Belgium, I consider myself a public artist. I'm publicly supported with public money. I'm performing in public spaces, which are also funded through arts funding from the Belgian government and various sectors. And one of the big questions I have in the idea of being collected, especially privately, because I think being collected by a museum is again another thing, but does this change the nature of what I would do, or also as an artist, like if I would make a work that would be collected by a person, a private person, like the piece of Sarah and Charles, would that fundamentally change also the nature of the work that I'm making, and what is this voice that I have as a public artist, and what would it be as a privately collected artist, and is it the same? Because I think performance has this also, because it's volatile, it's moving, it's not pinned down, or it's possible to change on each iteration. There's this kind of reactivity, and I think the audience that you're performing for is very much part of the work, maybe even more so than an object-based practice. So maybe that's a question maybe other performers here have also a perspective on, but I think it's a big question. And it also has to do with pricing a work, because as a public artist, for example, when I apply for funding, my main concern is that the performers receive living wages. So the price of a piece is based on the living wage of all the labor that goes into the making of the piece, and then the material costs, the transport, etc. And then there's a kind of author's rights added on top, and you get a figure very quickly. If you make a piece for a private collector, or, for example, in an art fair, how is the calculation of the piece, also knowing that it's going to enter an archive or, let's say, a collection for a duration of time? How do you consider that, and does labor then become less important? For example, here I was questioning, should I join this fair? But one of the biggest problems was who's going to pay the labor, and I don't have a private gallery, so the cost of paying, and I would not ask performers to come and perform for free because it's not in my ethics as a public artist, as I think of myself. So the questions then are like, yeah, where, how would I price it? Where is the value? What is the longevity of a work, and would the value grow like a painting or an object?
It's very
artists, no? And you've got artists, especially if you are a performing artist and stay in the category of visual artist, then you are indeed very fragile. If you step on the other side, art de la scène, performing art, then it's accepted by the authorities that they have to pay according to a normal ratio, the labor, time labor, of the artist and of the performers. So sometimes you lose, because being collectible, it's the excuse for the Ministry of Culture not paying the curators, the artists, because in the end the works will be sold. So they don't care about the time you spend in the production and activation of the piece. So it's a choice, actually, and as you said, Ula, it has to be assessed, because the mentality of the authorities, of the ministries of culture, doesn't reflect the porosity of the situation within the art scene.
So I'm aware actually that just to be killed during this one, we're slightly running out of time.
No, we're not. We can delay the next couple of performances.
Okay, all right, perfect. Well, there's a question, a lady that's been very patient at the back there, so I want her to...
Thank you very much. Actually, Isabel Bruno, I'm a gallerist in Paris, and I spent about 10 years of my life in the theatre as an actress. So I find myself as a gallerist very uncomfortable sometimes, because there's a lovely word that you said, Sarah, about escaping. This is performance was happening. It has to do with escaping, and I understand that it's something at that moment. And this is very, very important. I mean, as an audience, if you go to the theatre, if you go to the opera, and you say that night was exceptional, you've paid for it. So I think people are not paying to go into galleries, okay, they go to the museum, but I mean, this is, even if performance is not theatre, but still, what you said, I think is very, very important, because it is this particular moment, and you can say, I was there. So it's a performance as a musician, as an actor, and I think the audience should pay. I mean, afterwards, talking about different contracts, I don't know, you're a lawyer, but having worked as well in the cinema, I've noticed that we had in France two kinds of contracts for film directors, for instance. You had the author as an artist, and he would get the rights, royalties, selling, and you had the contract, which is oui, le contrat, merci. Le contrat réalisateur, which is a technician. So I think this is something perhaps could be worked differently, but it is important, because you are an artist, but you are performing somewhere, people are coming, you have an audience, you have to work 6 months before doing your work, and so I think perhaps it would, well, this is an idea, it could separate different things. The work you sell and the performance itself. I think coming and watching performances, and we know the engagement, we know the work, we know all that, and people are just watching and not paying. I'm sorry, it's not like being at the psychoanalyst, but I mean, artists are giving us so much. We could pay for that moment.
Can you hear me in this mic? It's really low, right? Okay. I think there's a problem that, like in Belgium, for example, like the audience, what they pay does not equivalent, it's not the equivalent of what it actually costs. So like most of the performances that, and I'm talking from dance and theater, they cost a lot more than the audience pays, so they're subsidized. That's why I say I'm a public artist. And I think that's very different, for example, in London, where like that's not really the case, and then the ticket prices are way higher. Like you will go and you will pay £100 or £60 to go to the ballet or something, and here you can get in for 20. Also for contemporary dance, it's like 12 and 18 euros, not 30 and 40 or 60. So there's also like this question, I think, and that's exactly the problem between like this
these two, and also museum fees are generally much lower because there's a lot more subsidized. So I think there's this question between private and public.
London museums are mostly free, that's the exception.
For me, the economy of live arts and the economy of visual arts have nothing to do. There is no porosity. In reality, as I live as an artist, a visual artist, there is absolutely no porosity between me, my way of producing my work, and live art. And the institution don't want to get also porosity between the... You are well much paid when you are a visual artist than like living live art artist. Then, as you said, the market is a good excuse for the institution not to pay the visual artists. Because the market will be here at the time, so we don't have to pay you, it's really true. So we are the poorest, as you said, the weakest.
Or potentially the richest, if you're very successful, so some few can be much more... I mean, as a dance artist, you will never...
For example,
there's a cap also.
I'm in between dancers, musicians, they are my friends. And ils ont chômage, par exemple, in France. So they have a better life, better money life than us. I don't believe yes. Maybe Tino Segal is really earning his life, but Tino Segal is a dancer. He comes from dance.
So, for the second time I'm going to try and say, I think we've kind of got to wrap up. Is there any final questions or comments before we do? But otherwise I think that Liv has a drinks announcement to make.
Really enjoyed listening to everyone's comments, but I think those of you that said how it's problematic or that we're not getting paid or we're not paying, can you offer some kind of step towards some sort of resolution then, please, so we can all move forward and because this is stuff that we know already and we've heard before, you know, that there's the market's a problem, that how we're going to sell performance through a problematic market, who's going to pay for it, who's going to sell it, you know, we need to have some kind of some sort of, I don't want to end on a negative note because this has been a good experience and we've tried really hard to work with John on, you know, I think we need to understand that selling performance, like not every performance can be sold or should be sold or will be sold. You know, we can work with those performances that might be offered, like sold, collected, exchanged for something else, you know. It's just like trying to think about different solutions potentially that are workable. That's, I think.
To big you up slightly, because one of Louise's questions is, what's the role of the gallery here? And your role has been to sit me down and say, this stuff is important and can be done, help us do it. Because this stuff needs time, right? Performance art is demanding. You need, even just to watch it, you need to make an investment of time in a way that isn't true of other things. But to actually understand it and negotiate it and contract around it. Like, I was a convert. I saw the light when you sat me down in a workshop and we talked about how it might be done. And that took a day of my time to get there. But then that's the kind of time it needs. So, galleries like Boston Bow are just trailblazing by sitting people down and saying, this stuff is important, help us do it.
What I want to say is that this roundtable is the first of many, I hope. Today we were just indeed very shallow in a way. I know Hélène has also developed a very interesting initiative called Perform Doc that I don't know if you have a few seconds still to talk, get introduced, because I think there's what we want us to stand for. We're not just a fair, because we're also a platform to gather all those initiatives, and I'm aware of the work those ladies did together with John. I know what Hélène is doing, and I know there's a lot of other really people thinking about this, doing things, and we want to gather this. So I'll be glad if you can say a few words about, or you don't want to? No? Okay, next time. What I want to say is that we can now, we're gonna have a drink sponsored by Arta. Arta is the booking for shipping. It enables you to ship very find the cheapest solution. And so we're gonna have some drinks here. And at the same time, there will be Marijke de Hover, who's gonna perform at 4 o'clock, a little bit delayed, as the platform says. And Nicolaus Gasserer is gonna perform at 4:30. And informal drinks are continuing here forever. And I hope conversations are continuing here. And we really hope to have the same round table again very soon. Probably somewhere else in Europe. We'll keep you posted. Thank you.
Listening to the greater situation you took over, and you still could have allowed her to speak. I could have said my thing and passed it to you. You just ruined my. Just own it. There's no talking back to me. That's what happened.
I'm sorry.
You can be sorry, but think about it.
Yeah, but don't please. You know I'm well meant.